and will be posted to the SFSP training section of the NDE website, along with all of the slides and the handouts. It is your choice if you want to have your camera on or off. We'd like to see your faces if possible, especially me because I haven't met everyone yet, so it'd be nice to put a face to the names. Please mute your microphone to avoid feedback and background noise if possible. If you have any questions, please type them into the chat box at any time. Beth will be typing along with you and answering some of those questions as she can. If you want to wait until the end, we can also unmute, or there'll be a few chat check-ins where we can unmute and you guys can ask those questions in person.
There they are. You're good. Thanks.
Handouts were emailed on April 25th, so you should have those. If you still need those, we will be posting them on the website, on our NDE website, sorry. And please stay logged in until the end. There will be an attendance form to fill out. So we want to make sure you get credit for your attendance today. And let's see, is Eric Saviano here? He has a few slides for us regarding, or excuse me, from Nebraska Appleseed. Let's see. I don't know if Eric's here yet.
Yeah, I don't see him, Jessica.
Okay.
I'll grab my phone and see if he's handy.
Okay. We'll give him a couple minutes. He might just be running a little bit behind. He has a few mini grant and outreach opportunities for us. So we want to let him explain those if possible.
He doesn't have the right Zoom link, so I'm going to work on that right quick. He'll be right
Okay,
with
I'll go through the slide to see how we're all doing today, and we'll back up. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, let me just skip through a couple of these real quick. Let me get back in here. Okay, we're going to skip through these. We'll come back to all of those. One of the things we wanted to check in on everybody today, see how you're feeling. How's everybody doing? We have these cute little dogs, and we'll put up a poll here. Let's see. You can let us know. We're going to do some interactive polls, and this is just kind of one way that we can check knowledge and see how everybody's doing. So if you want to go ahead and answer this, we'll go ahead and get started here. The first guy looks like he's excited to return. He knows what he's doing. He's here ready to learn. The second guy, I think is me, eager to learn and a little bit nervous. I think that's where I'm at. And this third guy, he says a nap sounds nice. I'm not into this today. So let us know how you're feeling in the poll. Let's see. All right. It looks like most of us are pretty excited. That's good. Almost everybody is excited. Some people are a little bit nervous. Hopefully, if you're tired and not ready for this training, we'll keep you at least engaged enough to get through it. All right. There's those results. All right. Let's see here. Eric's come on yet?
I'll keep a close eye on that for you, Jessica.
Okay, I'll just kind of move through and then just stop me whenever he arrives. We'll go through the agenda and stuff.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so this is our full agenda for today. It is, of course, jam-packed, of course, but we hope everybody learns a lot and comes away with some new knowledge and that we're ready to start SFSP. Oh. There we go. All right, so we're going to start first things first, changes for summer 2022. Let me look here. All right, so some of the...
Yeah, they want everybody muted.
But yet you can't hear.
Guys, we'll ask you to mute your microphones, please. Okay. Some of the big changes for SFSP this year are highlighted on this slide. Several of the USDA flexibilities and waivers that were available during the last couple of years are no longer in place. So of course, meals must be consumed at the meal sites as identified in your CNP application. No pickup or grab and go meals this year. And we cannot provide meals for more than one day. And those are some big changes.
Yeah, that is a big change. And yeah, continue with this slide, and then Eric is here. So yeah, when you feel like there's a good time to transition over to him.
Okay, yep, let's go ahead and stop now, Katie, and we'll let Eric out. Let me get back to his slides and we'll start. Oops, okay, there you go.
All right, thank you so much for letting me come and speak to everybody today. We were in the wrong room. Oops. So I get to talk just about 3 minutes about a couple of opportunities to engage in some new practices that you all could expand access to students with. So through your summer food service program options. So I already presented to the other 100 or so folks on the other webinar, but there are still slots open. So we have $150 mini grants. They're probably more like micro grants, but through Nebraska Appleseed, which is my organization, we have the availability to offer this. I will tell you how with the next slide. I can't forward it though. Nice. Okay. All right. So this is for existing summer food sponsors in Nebraska. Our goal is to see folks implement one or more of the 6 SFSP best practices during this upcoming summer at one of your sites. So you have to apply this practice throughout the course of the summer. You have to sign up before May 20th, which is not very soon, but feels soon, or the other opposite. Then the first 15 to sign up will receive the grants. This is all centered around some of the access and equity best practices that we have worked with other nutrition directors around the state to find. So people are actually doing this around the state. You'll see the examples of what you could be doing on the next slide. Click. Okay. The best practices that are just briefly summarized right here, but there are more explanation at the link below, are extend services to include more days, more meals, or both. I think that applies a lot to the folks serving just during summer school. If you can figure out a way to get more students participating through extending the service, we'd appreciate that. Offer consistent outreach that meets families where they are. That could be translation. That could be sending something before the school year ends, something new that you're not doing already. There are definitely ideas in the resources at the link below. Design appealing menus to attract more kids. That means maybe surveying kids, getting community input, making location and design decisions with participation in mind. What's easiest for you might not always be easiest for the kiddos. Host various activities at the sites and make them healthy. Since we're in congregate feeding mode this year, this is a great opportunity to
All right, see you later, guys.
Keep people engaged. And then last one is implement precautionary measures for students who've been impacted by COVID-19. That might just be training your staff to just make sure they know it's okay to keep your mask on, set some side away, set some part of the lunchroom away for folks who want to socially distance, things like that. We'll do the next slide. Okay, switching gears. Anyway, we have 15 of those grants. I know they're tiny, but it can be supporting, buying a trash can or something that you like. And it will also help us get you some information down the road on how to engage with this stuff more. So I will put in the chat the link to do that in just a bit. The other 2 slides I have are just outreach materials that are templates that you can use to get the word out about your programs. The first one, the back of slide, is the Nebraska specific. It's got the branding you all use already, the Meet Up, Eat Up, and it's got templates for outreach, including a press release and social media slides and things like that. I'll put that in the chat. The next one is a national one. No Kid Hungry supports Appleseed. They support other nutrition programs since the beginning of the pandemic and before.
Okay.
This one,
Please
this
mute
one
your microphone.
specific to one specific thing in it that I love is that there's a parent resource, a letter to parents that describes why things are changing, and you have to come back to eat congregate meals again, and they rightly blame the federal government for that, which is kind of a pain. Although there are benefits, right, Katie? So those are two options I'm going to put in the chat as well. Be on the lookout for these, and we'd love to see you sign up for those things. If you have questions, you can email me or call me, and I'll let you all get on with your training. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Eric. Thanks for sharing that information with us. Okay, we'll keep moving on here. Okay, we already went through this, went through agenda. We were talking about the changes for 2022. And I was just getting to, so even with all of the changes and some of the challenges that come along with those changes, there is a silver lining. And that is that, we all provide, or you all provide rather, other benefits to the communities that you are in that are just as important as the healthy meals that you serve. You're giving children and adults an opportunity for in-person interaction with their peers. Kiddos get to discuss, or talk with trusted adults, and the pandemic effects on life have been widespread. So this is a return to normal for students and children. All right, moving on with the agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about program requirements. Program requirements, of course, the first thing is attend training, which you can all check off your list now because you're here today. If after attending this training, you think that maybe a staff member would benefit from some of this information, like I said, this recording will be posted on our SFSP training website on the NDE website. You're going to be training your staff. That is a requirement. They're going to need program training as well as civil rights, and we'll talk a little bit more specifically about those items in a few slides. Finding eligible meal service sites. So in the application guide that was sent on April 15th, it shows in there how to determine whether or not a site is eligible. If you have questions or need some help on determining that, please reach out to one of the NDE program specialists, and any one of us can help you through that process. There will be monitoring of sites that has to happen. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. And you are required to keep all SFSP records for the current year plus 3 previous years. You are, of course, providing the free meals to children ages 1 to 18. And you cannot serve meals to only summer school students. All right. And a little bit more about program requirements. The CFR 200 sections are the set of program requirements program regulations that apply to all federal programs. So it's not specific just to SFSP, it's to all federal programs. And they're not overly prescriptive because every organization is different, but no matter the type, size, or structure of an organization, there must be some sound internal procedures and controls in place to document exactly how the funds were used. So that just means basically that we could trace every penny of the reimbursement that you receive for summer meals to ensure that it was spent only on SFSP. So as a sponsor, it's important that you have controls in place to plan for the unexpected and then to implement the appropriate procedures when needed. You need to have consistent internal controls that demonstrate compliance with SFSP program regulations. All right. Open sites advertising. So one of the requirements for SFSP is that you advertise what site locations are open and what times they are open, what meals are served. If you have any site rules, you're going to want to post those as well. We want to make sure that participants are aware of what sites are open this year. Specifically this year, because there were a lot of additional sites that were open in the last couple of years that maybe as we begin to return to normal operations, those sites might not be open this year. An example would be some drive-through site or grab and go site that was open during the pandemic that maybe is not eligible this year. Okay. Staff training. So all of the USDA training and guidance manuals can assist sponsors in training staff at all operational levels. The information for this training can be found in the administrative guide, which is pictured here. The link to all of the SFSP handbooks is on the SFSP forms and resources webpage on the NDE website. So www.education.ne.gov, and you can go to the SFSP site to find those handbooks. All right, and continuing in staff training, when training staff, it is important to make sure that team members are aware of the program's purpose. They also must understand the importance of record keeping, that there is a meal pattern that must be documented and followed, and Katie will talk about that in a few slides. And they must also understand which site visits must be completed and by whom, as well as any reporting procedures necessary for the sponsor and its sites. We'll get into some of that stuff here. SFSP training is on the NDE website. If you look here, you can see where that is located, and we are specifically highlighting the civil rights training, which we will review here next. All right, so all staff must be trained on civil rights requirements. You can refer to the civil rights training on our education.ne.gov website. There is also an additional civil rights training on our website as well. And you must visibly post the "And Justice for All" poster at all meal service sites. If you do not have a poster, there is a link that you can go to, and I'm hoping somebody's going to put it in the chat, either Katie or Beth. There's a link that you can go to order your "And Justice for All" posters. Okay, and as a sponsor or site, you are required to document all training. So you want to make sure that you have a training log, and that on that training log, you have identified the topics that were discussed. Make sure that the date is recorded and the team members that attended the training. Training is a tool for your team. So make sure that you're keeping track of that and documenting that for your own records. Okay, so we're going to have a quick check-in with Beth to see how things are going in the chat room, and if there are any questions that have been answered that might be good to share with the group.
Someone asked about the outreach materials, and Katie responded, outreach materials, ordering information in the SFSP graphic in the training follow-up message to all sponsors next week. Great question. The other one is, if you serve breakfast, do you have to do it at all sites? And can you do just one if you have multiple sites? You guys get to pick the meals each site participates in. Just make sure that your advertising is specific on who is doing breakfast and who's doing lunch, or if you're doing an afternoon snack, that it is documented on your signage.
And we had that early question. Are you getting to the classroom, eating in the classroom?
Go ahead.
Beth? Yeah. Sorry to interrupt or talk.
No,
over
that's fine.
you.
I just hadn't got that far.
Yeah, this is a great question we get asked frequently. As you know, lots of schools utilize the summer food service program to be able to provide meals to students they have attending summer school. And of course, that's fine. You also have to make sure that you advertise the sites, just like Jessica and Beth have both mentioned. You've got to make those sites truly open to ensure that community children who aren't enrolled in your summer school know that the meals are there and that you prepare enough to be prepared or able to serve them if they visit your site. You've got to have a designated place that you'll allow those walk-ins to eat, in addition to being allowed to offer meals or let students eat in their designated classrooms. And I understand you might wanting to do that for a number of reasons. One of them could be just grouping kids in case there becomes a COVID-related issue and you want to be able to do some determination of who had close contact and stuff like that. That's fine. There's two options for counting meals. Those classroom students can go to the cafeteria, go through the line, get their meal, and you've got your trained staff member to count meals at the end of that line. That's fine. The other option is if you have your food service staff deliver the meals to the individual classrooms, you've got to make sure that that teacher knows when and how to complete the meal count sheet. We'll spend some more time talking about appropriate and complete meal count records here in a little bit, but just want to make you aware of that needs to be sort of part of your internal controls and your process depending on how you serve meals. So you can do that. You got to make sure you count the meals at the right time and have the correct people trained to do that. And those classroom teachers also need to be aware that kids shouldn't be slipping, especially not perishable items in their backpack to take home. So we'll talk a little bit more about what is allowed to go off-site from an SFSP location, but perishable items are definitely those ones that or time temperature of use can become part of the equation there. We don't want a kid to get sick. So you got to make sure those classroom teachers know if there might be an item a kid could take home because it's individually packaged. We have rules around that and they need to be trained on those. So just a few extra considerations, but the classroom eating is allowed.
Okay. Thank you, Beth and Katie. I'll keep on moving. All right, so next we're going to look at application and claims. All right, so an application guide was sent out on April 15th that detailed the procedure and process in getting your application submitted in CNP. Those applications are due by May 6th, 2022. And we do ask that you adhere to that deadline. It just gives our state staff enough time to receive all of those applications, to troubleshoot and help to fix any errors. If there's a reason why they need to be returned for corrections, then that gives enough time for you to make those corrections and get them back to us so that they can be approved in time. Because all sites must have approved applications and all sponsor application packets must be approved before meals can be claimed for reimbursement. Okay. The application will be entered into our CNP website and you can find that, or excuse me, in our CNP system, and you can find that on the website nutrition.education.ne.gov. And this is a screenshot of what that looks like. And you'll have a sponsor application and then site applications, depending on how many sites you have. You'll submit a budget detail. You'll also have a food production facility list if you are a vended facility. And then if the checklist summary comes up, there will be items that you may have to enter there as well. All of those items you'll then submit for approval, and we will take it from there and get back to you if we need some corrections. And if you have any issues or any questions that arise as you're filling out those applications, please reach out to any of the program specialists at NDE and we can help you through that process. All right. Oh, the next thing we're going to discuss is the UEI. Many of you probably heard it referred to as the DUNS number. And at this point, you'll still see the DUNS number as the number referenced in your sponsor application. However, you may want to double check your registration of renewal, because if this, and this is circled, this 11/13 of 2016 would be far overdue and expired. But if that date is expired in your application, you're going to want to make sure that you get on to sam.gov and get that renewed, because unfortunately we're not able to approve an application if that deadline has passed. You do receive a lot of notification and notice from sam.gov about 3 months prior to the expiration date. And so you're going to want to pay attention to those emails that you're receiving. And we want to make sure that everyone knows that UEI is free. So you never have to pay a fee for renewing or obtaining your UEI or DUNS number. You never have to pay for that. I know that you'll receive a lot of emails that maybe look like they're from sam.gov and they're requiring a fee. And we just want to make sure that you know that those are not legitimate and you do not have to pay to get this renewed. Okay. So this is in the picture above, you'll see this is a screenshot from CNP, and this is a site application that is complete and approved. So it has the green check mark along that left side, and the status is approved. So all of the sites that you will be utilizing this year, you're going to want to make sure that those are the ones that you have updated and submitted to state for approval. And some of you might have a lot of sites that you're not using this year. And unfortunately, those sites cannot be deleted. We want to make sure that we maintain our records in our CMP system. And so those will still remain in there. We're just asking that you do not modify them. Just leave them there with the red arrow next to them and the status of pending validation. So they will just remain in pending validation status, even as you submit your application packet for the sites that you are using. Okay. Moving on to park sites in inclement weather. So this is something we wanted to mention. Please keep in mind that if you are operating an SFSP site that is outdoors, you must identify a plan for inclement weather. So it could be to move that meal service indoors if possible, or it could just be as simple as signage that you have posted prior to service that just says that if it's maybe rain or bad weather, extreme heat even, maybe you have the stipulations out there of when meal service will not take place at those sites. You're going to want to indicate in your application, if this is an outdoor or mobile site, you'll select yes on number 36. And then a little bit further down on number 40, you'll indicate your plan there. So that will go in CMP on your site application. Okay, average daily participation. So the average daily participation, or ADP, is in the site application. And this is going to be the maximum number of meals that you are going to serve at a site. You can adjust this as you need to. If you find that you are serving way less than what you initially thought your ADP was going to be, you can go in to that site application and adjust that number. And then you'll just have to resubmit for approval to the state. Keeping your ADP up to current numbers is important because it helps to reduce waste and improve the integrity of the program. The biggest thing is that this is tied to your claim, and we'll talk about a little bit about that in the next slide. One way that we were trying to come up with a solution to come up with a number for ADP was to utilize the 18-19 participation as your guide. This was the last application that you did that was pre-pandemic, before we had grab and go options available. So this might be a better feel for what you'll see this year. But again, if you find that you're having higher numbers than expected or lower numbers than expected, you can just go in and adjust that ADP number in your site application and resubmit. The ADP tells NDE how many children an average day would serve. It sets each site's cap or max daily average number of meals. And again, revise the ADP in the site app and then submit for approval. The most important part of this is submit the revision to increase your ADP is done before you submit for your claim reimbursement, okay? All right, field trips. So the application site also holds the documentation for field trips, and this is a screenshot from CNP. When SFSP participants are taken off the approved meal service site, if you have a group that's going to the swimming pool, for example, and they'll be eating their SFSP meals off-site, a field trip request must be completed. So you can see on the screenshot, the red arrow, the site field trip list, and you'll click details and you'll add that field trip request there. We want to make sure that all of those are put in CMP. They are for single day field trip requests only, and they must be submitted at least 24 hours before the field trip. The site where the on-site, where the meals normally would have been consumed must remain open, and you cannot claim any field trip meals if NDE is not notified of the off-site meals at least 24 hours before the field trip. So you're going to want to make sure that those get in there at least 24 hours prior. All right, dietary accommodations. So federal regulations require accommodations for special dietary needs, and the sponsor application asks you to ensure that this takes place. So on number 77, you're going to want to make sure that you answer yes, because it is a requirement. You must ensure that children's dietary needs are accommodated in the event that they need a meal substitute required by a medical condition. So the medical statement provides the documentation that you need for meal pattern substitutions that are not based on parent request. So for example, a request would be almond milk for children in a family that practices a vegan diet. So that would be a request and not something that would have a medical statement. So you want to make sure that these accommodations are for medical statements. All right, claims for reimbursement. Claim submitted individually for each month the meals are served. Claims must be submitted and accepted no later than 60 days after the last day of the month the meals were served. And at NDE, we encourage as a best practice to submit your claims by noon on the 10th of each month. So something internally that you want to make sure that you have ahead of time is you want to know who is responsible for the monthly claims. So there should be one person or two people or whatever your internal control is to make sure that you have a plan to make sure that those are submitted by within that 60 days. On the SFSP training website training section of the NDE website, there is an SFSP claim entry hints and tips. And so you can check that out if you're having any issues with submitting a claim, and it can be a helpful resource for you. All right, so we have a couple of questions that are going to pop up as a poll, and we're going to test some knowledge and see if everybody's been paying attention up to this point. First question is, how many days after the last day of a claim month does a sponsor have to submit a claim for reimbursement? And we just reviewed this, so hopefully everybody gets this one right. All right. Looks like almost everyone got it right. We're going to click for the answer here, and the answer is 60 days. So you have 60 days after the last day of a claim month to submit that claim for reimbursement. All right. And what must be approved before meals served at a site are eligible for reimbursement? And again, we have a poll question. So is it the site application only? Is it the sponsor application only? Or is it both the site application and the sponsor application? And you can answer that on the poll. It looks like almost everybody's getting that one correct. And the answer, of course, is the site application and the sponsor application. Both must be submitted in order to serve meals at that site. All right. I think we have another one. When is the deadline to submit an application to serve SFSP meals in 2022? Do you remember what that deadline was? Oh, good. Almost everybody got that one right. All right. So the answer, of course, is May 6th. And please adhere to that deadline so we can get those all approved at the state level and we're ready to start SFSP. All right, we're going to move on down the agenda to site monitoring and documentation. Let's look at the site monitor a little bit closer. So a site monitor is not necessarily at the site every day. So this is somebody that's going to be detail oriented. This is going to be a person who feels confident in the program requirements and they are not afraid to contact the NDE to clarify requirements when needed. They are going to complete those site visits. They're going to ensure that the site is maintaining the daily records. So that includes point of service meal counts, production records, or delivery tickets. They're going to ensure that that Injustice for All poster is clearly posted during all meal times. They're going to communicate any problems with the sponsor, communicate any problems with the sponsor and identify needed corrective action. And the site supervisor is going to be somebody that's going to be on site daily. So they're going to maintain those daily records. Remember that missing records equal denial of claim or denial of costs. So meals served only during the approved time. So the person has to be on site daily to make sure that those meals are happening during the approved meal time. They're going to verify meals meet meal pattern and at the proper temperature. And they're going to be able to verify that meals have all the required components. In addition, site supervisors are typically responsible for conducting site visits and reviews. They report back issues or other information back to the sponsor again. They maintain those sanitation standards and for ensuring that all sites have that Injustice for All posters. So they're going to make sure that the children are served before the adults and that they're going to implement any corrective action. So they're on site to make sure that any corrective action that was identified is going to be implemented. And of course that the point of service meal count is completed when meals are served, not before then. All right, a pre-operational site visit. So administrative staff are responsible for completing the pre-operational site visits at all new sites and sites that have been operated in the past, but with operational issues, like needing technical assistance or a second site visit the previous year in an effort to correct a problem. Sites that were required to complete corrective action plan in the prior year are also required to have a pre-operational site visit completed before operation begins for the following year. You can see the pre-operational, also called the pre-approval site visit form in the training handouts, and those will be posted on our NDE website. The visit is a nice opportunity to ensure that the site supervisor understands all program requirements and to ensure that the site is ready to accommodate the SFSP. So they're going to make sure that trash receptacles are available. They're going to be looking at food prep, holding, and service equipment to make sure that they have all of the equipment they need and they're ready to go. So again, there's going to be a handout that you can see if you look at those. If you look at the handouts that were sent, you can see that there. And the annual site visit. So this is required for all sites within the first 4 weeks. It is conducted during meal service and it is to identify potential problems. So if there is inadequate documentation related to daily production records or delivery tickets, if there's inadequate documentation related to daily meal counts, operating outside approved meal times, not counting meals at point of service, and any health inspection violations. The racial ethnic data form. So this is again completed by the site supervisor. It's collected once during operation for each site It is a visual identification to determine a participant's racial or ethnic category and include participant in the group. So you include the participant in the group to which he or she appears to belong, identifies with, or is regarded as a member of by the community. So that is going to be on page 3 of 5 in the site visit form. All right. Okay, so we're going to take a quick 5-minute break. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat now, and we can get to those. And we'll share any that would be helpful to the group.
So I'll start my timer, get up, get a drink, use the restroom, move your muscles just a little bit. And then in about 5 minutes, like Jessica said, we will address questions that have been put in the chat since we last did a check-in there. And of course, you can jot down questions you're kind of mulling over. If you want to put them in the chat or unmute and ask them when we come back after our short break, that would be a good opportunity to do that. All right, we're getting close to the end of our break. I've seen a couple of questions come into the chat. Just give you 20 seconds to finish up typing anything for those of you who started. Yeah. All right. Check the chat real quick, Jessica. Yep. Christina said she didn't get handouts, but thankfully Beth is putting those links in the chat box kind of one by one as Jessica's covered them. So they're all available there. And, you know, Jessica mentioned that we'll send an email early next week that provides information about training. Obviously, for those of you who need to utilize those training handouts to train other people in your team who aren't with us today, we'll include that along with a link to the recording of today's training. So all of the resources surrounding training should reach your inbox next week. And it's just really important to stick on here till the end. Like Jessica said earlier when we got started, we'll do a little thing to make sure we record your attendance and get some contact information, including your email address, so we know exactly who needs to receive what we'll have available. My dog is misbehaving over here. So anyhow, Shauna asked a question about FFVP, and I just want to clarify that there are lots of FFVP schools that also do SFSP, but your school's participation in the FFVP and ability to utilize funds you've been awarded for that program end with the last day of school that you have in May. So even though you might be operating a summer school, that is separate from your academic year. And that means FFVP cannot continue to be money that's spent. So you've got to have your last day of participation and purchases obviously made for FFVP before the last day of school occurs, because that's the last day you can serve foods purchased with those funds. It's a good question. Yeah, and you got the NSNA link in there. Thank you, Jessica. And I know Beth said she'd take care of some of those, or one of those requests as well. So yeah, happy to answer that question, Shauna. I'm glad we got the chance to clear that up. I think that you're not the only one who had that question, so I'm definitely glad you asked it. And anything else? Anyone want to unmute real quick and you can ask your question that way if you've got one in your mind. If not now, you might think of some as we proceed through the training. We'll give another opportunity to ask and answer questions before we're all done today. Is it my turn, Jessica? I never can remember. Yeah, do you want me to share my screen and then?
Yes, sure, go ahead.
Okay.
I was trying, actually, I don't know if it's me. Am I still, sorry about that.
Yeah.
Let me get back in here.
Oh, and Jane, you asked a question I didn't answer, but I did see it. It was, can you have multiple site supervisors for one site? Obviously, we know that people enjoy the summertime because it should offer them a little bit of a break, especially having gone through 2 pretty difficult school years and summers of serving meals. So I understand the purpose behind you asking that question. And yes, that is fine. As you know, the application for each site gives space to identify one site supervisor. And that's a person we would expect to see at your site. That's the person we would expect to be able to ask questions of about your meal service, gather information from, all that good stuff if we're coming out there to do a site visit on your operation. So we've got a text box at the bottom of every site application available for you to add any details that weren't provided adequate space or a place to do that in the site application. So Identify one of your site supervisors in the designated spot near the top of the site application. If you have alternates who also serve in that same role because you do a sort of rotation, make sure to add that person's information at the bottom in that text, in that notes from sponsor box at the bottom of the site application. That way we know there's a couple of options to choose from when it comes to that site supervisor. Obviously, you're going to make sure you provide both people in this situation a very comprehensive training because they're really that go-to person. So on the day that they're on duty at that site, they're really in charge of making sure they can answer all questions, that all of your daily documentation is being maintained properly. So their role is obviously very integral and they've got to be a detail-oriented person, but what you posed is okay. Just let us know who those people are. Good question. Thanks for re-asking it. Yeah, I'll share my screen, Jessica, so you don't have to do the clicking for me. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect.
Okay, awesome. Come on, computer. There we go. Yeah, Jessica's taken us through about the first half of training today. So you got a little breather, you had your 5-minute break, you formulated some really great questions. I imagine you might have more after we go through the next few sets of topics here. And we're going to start off with meal requirements because obviously that's a significant reason. That's the main reason for doing this program. You're providing meals, right? You know that you get reimbursement for the meals you provide, and those meals have to meet certain requirements. And available at the top of the SFSP training page and was provided in handouts sent in advance. I know everyone didn't get those, but we'll make sure that you have easy access to them when we follow up to this training with a message to everybody on Monday. As you know, Beth has also been putting those in the chat. So the resources are readily available to you. At the top of that list, you see the meal pattern chart, and I've included a little snippet of it where you can see that the columns, you know, there's 4 columns, 2, 3, and 4 provide information on the meal type and then what the required minimum serving size is for each of the components that's listed down the left side of the sheet. So if you're new to summer meals, if you're just not that familiar with what's required to be served at those meals, make sure to have easy access to this summer food service program meal pattern chart. It's kind of like your Bible for the summer. It helps make sure that you provide meals that meet those requirements. Remember, the reimbursement is issued because you provide a meal or the meals that provide all the components and in their minimum serving sizes. So we don't give partial reimbursement for meals that meet part of those requirements. We only can give full reimbursement for meals that fully meet the requirements outlined in the chart there. We'll take a closer look at a couple of meal types. The ones we see most commonly served in the summer meals program are breakfast and lunch. Not every site does both of those, but lots of them do. And at breakfast, according to the SFSP, you must serve a fluid milk, some combination or one or the other of a fruit and a vegetable and a grain item. I want to point out, though, that if you're a school food authority and you obviously are very used to utilizing your cycle menu that meets the school breakfast and the school lunch program meal patterns, you can continue to utilize that cycle menu. You don't have to switch over to SFSP requirements. You know, SFSP meal pattern might be a little bit easier if you have a sort of non-traditional type of meal service or model or method. It's a little bit easier for folks who don't have the year-round experience operating a meals program through the USDA. So, like I said, if you're a school and you want to continue your usual meal pattern, we encourage you to do that. If you don't want to do that, then this is what you follow. And the next slide shows the lunch, where you've got to serve all 4 components and must include 5 items. So again, fluid milk is a requirement at lunch, just like it is at breakfast. Then you serve 2 items or sort of a combination somehow of a 2 fruit, 2 vegetable, or a fruit and a vegetable at lunch, in addition to a grain item and then a serving from the meat or meat alternate group. We'll take a look at an example or a sample menu for lunch and utilize the food buying guide to demonstrate how it's a really nice tool to help ensure that You know how much to purchase and prepare in order to meet them or provide the minimum required serving sizes that you see identified in the middle column in this SNP from the meal pattern chart. So if you've got any questions about whether your menus meet the requirements, if your meals are providing the minimum required serving sizes, if you've utilized that food buying guide tool appropriately to figure out the right information, you can certainly contact any one of the program specialists on the team at NDE. It's definitely a part of our job to help you and provide you the technical assistance so that you feel comfortable in knowing that you're providing meals that will allow you to earn the full reimbursement, right? The full meal gets you the reimbursement. Anyway, some sites serve snack. The only thing I want to mention about snack is that we have a non or unallowable meal combination. It would be to serve juice and milk as your only components. So that's really one of the only stipulations when it comes to making a snack, a reimbursable snack, out of the available component groups. You just can't serve juice and milk. That's too much liquid, all that stuff. Little tiny tummies probably wouldn't get a whole lot of nutrition out of that. We want a good variety of foods too. So we just want to make sure that we don't put this combination on our snack menu if you serve snacks. So obviously your meal service, you're preparing meals yourself. You might prepare them on site or at the sites you serve from. You might have meals prepared at a central kitchen and then delivered to various sites around the community, or you might receive meals from a vendor. So if you're a sponsoring organization that doesn't have the capacity to make its own meals, you can certainly have a contract with a company to prepare those meals for you. You want to obviously serve your meals within the approved meal service times. And Jessica did quite a bit of talking and provided everybody with a really nice guide to help you navigate the application in the C&P system. And one of those most important pieces with lots of very important details is the site application. It's in there where you tell us when your meal service starts and ends for each of the meal types you serve. So if that changes, and we understand that it could, you may want to increase or decrease the duration of your meal service time. Shift the start and end times, perhaps, once you kind of get a good feel of how many children are going to be visiting your site. You might make adjustments for, how late students or kids sleep in the summertime. And sometimes you don't know that about your group until you get going and get your meal service sort of established in the community. When those changes occur, we really need you to make a revision in your site application to accurately reflect that. If one of our consultants or program specialists visits a site, we notice that you're not serving within the window that's indicated in your site application, that could result in money being collected back for meals that were served outside of what is in your approved site application. So especially important to have someone sort of in this mind. Do I need to make adjustments or revisions to my site application because something about my meal service has changed? Okay. So remember too that those delivered meals cannot be taken to a meal site more than 1 hour before meal service is set to begin if that site doesn't have equipment that's going to hold the food at the proper temperature. So hot foods need to be held at a hot temperature, 135 or more. Cold foods need to be held at 40 degrees or less, Fahrenheit, of course. If you don't have equipment to do that, you can't have those meals delivered to the site if it's more than 1 hour before meal service is set to begin. I'd add a little bit of caution on this too. On a really, really hot day, 90, 95 degrees for lunch, that food sitting out there without some temperature control for an hour is actually kind of a stretch. You want to be aware of those sort of factors that might compromise the safety of the food and make sure you're taking appropriate adjustments to the meal service or meal delivery times compared to meal service. Those daily production records that if you're a school you are very familiar with, if you are a longstanding participant in the CACFP at risk or the summer food service program, you're also very familiar with production records. Some of you in this room obviously have a vendor that provides your meals to you, and you would be familiar with what a delivery ticket looks like. So for many of you, this is a review, but I want to just reiterate how important these records are. You might have slightly different staff in charge of your summer service compared to what you do during the school year. And with that changeover in staff, got to make sure we provide them with training that kind of some assurances that you are following all the program regulations and guidelines. So those production records, or if you receive meals from a central kitchen or from a vendor, those are your documents that show you provided all required components in the meals you served to those kiddos that visited the site. Again, we don't give partial reimbursement for meals that partially or somewhat meet the requirements. This is, again, such an important set of documents because it shows us that you or how you utilize the reimbursement you received. So really important thing here, lots of details, right? This is not like a Cliff's Notes sort of version of what happens at your site. This is like a Tolstoy novel, very long, very detailed. We want to be able to rebuild a meal based on the documentation that your site staff or your meal prep staff provides. So that's kind of how you can think of it. Want to keep in mind too, that if something wasn't recorded, a component wasn't written on a production record is entirely missing. In our world, the NDE world, if it wasn't recorded, it wasn't served. So those written records really are important. We want you to keep your money, of course. We know that the money is really what matters in continuing to pay staff and buy food to serve meals to kids. So just kind of reiterate that with your staff to make sure they understand how important this is. So you've got to do those production records while the meal's being served. You can't do it the day before, cannot do it the week before, can't do it the next day or the week after. You wouldn't remember what you served and how much you made. You've got to be handwriting on this document. I would expect a production record to have some food stains and drippings on it. That's okay. I don't care how clean they look. I just care that they have all the details we would need. So remember, if a production record is missing, you can't find it. You can't hand it over to me or Jessica or Beth when we come and ask for it. To us, that means it wasn't done. And we cannot allow you to claim the meals, okay? Or if I'm missing production record for Tuesday, I can't let you claim the meals that you said you served on Tuesday because you have no documentation to show me what you provided. So here is a sample production record. Jessica provided it in the handouts. Beth, I know, has put the link to it in the chat. If you're a school, you have a different looking production record that you use for school lunch and breakfast, and you can continue to use that. You don't need to switch to this one just for summer purposes. But if you're sort of a summertime only sponsor, feel free to obviously utilize this production record. We want you to use it. If you have an alternate version, we'd love to have you run it by us just to make sure it captures all the necessary information that we want these to provide. I wouldn't want something really important to be omitted from a version of your own that you use. So one of the ways to make sure that doesn't happen is to have one of our consultants get our eyes on it and make sure it, like I said, captures all that important info. So obviously on this one, you would indicate which meal type you're preparing or recording the preparation for. Obviously the sponsor and site name is important. In particular, if you have a list of different sites you operate, and writing out the full date, month, day, and year has to be done on this record. I never want to think that someone might recycle production records from a previous year. And if the year isn't written, don't know for sure that that didn't happen. So those are important details for the top section. You're also just going to identify, obviously, the menu items in the left-hand column under menu, and then the number of planned servings or portion sizes, as well as the portion size for each of those. So this is, again, kind of a double check or an insurance for you, where you physically writing it down and actually thinking about what I'm going to serve and what my serving sizes are is necessary information for two reasons. Obviously, recall back to that orange colored meal pattern chart where it lists the minimum serving sizes of food items. This is where you check my menu and what I plan against that to make sure I'm providing the minimum or planning to provide the minimum servings. The other one is to think about if this is how much I need for a minimum serving and I anticipate to make this many meals, that's going to help me determine how much to purchase and to prepare. So it's a really great planning purpose sort of or portion of the document. And then in the bottom part, This is the part you have to complete as the meal is getting made. Expect it to look dirty. Like I said, it should have some stains and, you know, crease marks and all that stuff on it because it's a working document. It doesn't have to look perfect. It just needs lots of details. So obviously the food items you've used go in the left-hand column. That's where they're recorded. If you home make an item like lasagna or a homemade pizza or any kind of casserole type dish where you would follow a standard recipe, we would expect not that you had to write the entire recipe and all the ingredients in this small space. You would have your recipe recorded on a separate piece of paper, perhaps, or a separate document of some type. Maybe it's in your computer. You just reference what that recipe is. Maybe it has a number, maybe it has a name, but then I see, oh, there's a cheeseburger macaroni recipe here. Okay, cool. Show me the cheeseburger macaroni recipe. I'm going to be able to look at that. It would tell me how much pasta, how much cheese, how much ground beef was used. And from that information, I can obviously determine if adequate ground beef was prepared to meet the minimum required serving size for beef for the meal. So those kinds of details are the things we need to see in some combination of records, obviously. You're also going to record total amount prepared. So it might be 3 of those cheeseburger macaroni recipes, right? That's one way to write that. For something like a loaf of bread, you're going to tell us how many loaves and how much each loaf weighed. As you can imagine, bread comes in variety. The loaves of bread come in a variety of weights, and a 12-ounce loaf is certainly different than a 16-ounce loaf. And we need to make sure that you provided the minimum required quantity. So we need to have you write as many details on those records as you can. Again, like I said, if you had it's something you could use or should be able to use to recreate a menu and a meal service exactly like the first person did it. So pretend you want a substitute, you want a day off or something like that, right? But you say, hey, I made this really popular, this great pizza the other day I started with pears and carrots and milk, and we had about 150 kids participate. There were almost no leftovers. They ate it all up. It was great. You can make this for the day I'm gone. It's easy. I know they like it. You could hand that person your old production record. They would use it as a guide to know exactly how much to make. Okay, so that's sort of a good way to maybe describe the purpose of this record. The other purpose, obviously, is for when a program specialist from NDE visits you, we can look at that record and know exactly what you did. I could recreate it if I wanted to when I was visiting your site. So that's the way we think about that. I also want to bring to your attention, and I have done a poor job of clicking through this like I intended to. The amount left over column is very important because it provides you with really helpful information when it comes to, limiting waste. If you're preparing menu items kids don't really like, but you're not recording it some way that would help you identify trends and stuff like that, then you're not doing probably the best you could to have really tight budgetary control and like bottom line management, which is really important. We know that's especially important now because food costs are higher. So you want like no waste because you don't have a lot of extra pennies to spare. Make sure you're recording the amount left over column. You want to see that. It's also kind of an integrity insurance for you if you're doing a good job of recording and also on using that information to minimize leftovers. There is a very little question from us about, how the money's getting used. Is it getting used wisely? Again, this is a federally funded program. It's your job to be good stewards of that money. And so doing all you can to minimize waste is especially important. And recording leftovers is one of the helpful ways you can sort of achieve that. Those of you who have a central kitchen prepare meals or you've got a vendor, right? You have delivery tickets that should be coming with your meals every single day that they're delivered. Those delivery tickets are going to show obviously the quantity of number of items of each of the menu items that's included in something probably like a sack lunch. It needs to have a delivery date that includes the year. It needs to tell you what meal type this is for, especially if your vendor maybe delivers breakfast and lunch together, lunch for the current day and maybe breakfast for the next day. Whoever your site supervisor is needs to look at those delivery tickets and make sure that what's on that paper matches what they received. Okay, delivery time and temperature are also important for the food safety considerations. So making sure that your vendor is adhering to the contractual agreement to provide meals not more than 1 hour before the meals start to be served. If the site doesn't have holding facilities or equipment, then that's a really important thing they need to adhere to. It's your money that you're paying them, right? So they need to make sure they do their part to help you all maintain compliance in providing meals. Here's an example or a sample delivery ticket that has all of that necessary information. So again, site supervisor is going to look this over. Site supervisor is going to take the temp of the foods. If it's cold, right, it should be at 40 or less. If it's hot foods, at least 135 or higher. They're going to record that along with the time. Now, if your site supervisor notices a consistent trend that when the food reaches the site, they're temping it, it's never at the right temp, that's definitely something at the sponsor administration level you want to take up with your vendor. It might mean adjusting delivery time. It's something, but remember that vendor needs to make sure they're giving you food that is safe, because you don't want to risk foodborne illness with one of your participating kiddos. That gives your site some pretty undesirable PR. So just make sure they're doing their part. And one of the best ways to help ensure that is to have that site supervisor check and record those necessary details. You also don't want to pay for meals that don't provide all the required components. So that supervisor, again, needs to check this delivery ticket against a few of the meals that are provided, especially if they're unitized and like individualized. You don't want to be missing milk for all of them or missing the second fruit or vegetable in all the bags. Those are meals a sponsor would not pay that vendor for, right? The vendor's contracted to provide all of the required components. You've got to have that site supervisor checking that information because it's insurance for you too, right? Okay, a couple questions. We've got some poll questions, obviously. After these, we'll take a quick break, not like a break, but a look at the chat kind of break to answer questions that have come in from the group. So which of these components are required at breakfast in order to serve reimbursement or to provide a reimbursable meal? Is it fruit, juice, and milk? Is it a vegetable and a grain, or is it a fluid milk, a grain, and then a fruit, vegetable, one or the other, or a combination of the two? Of course, my dogs are barking during a training. That's a shock. Yeah, you all did great. It's true. It's fluid milk, or you're correct, I should say. It's fluid milk, a grain item, and then a fruit or a veggie, or maybe some combination of two small portions of those. Yeah, awesome job. Seems like you understand that breakfast meal pattern quite well. So yeah, we've got 2 more questions. Yeah, is it allowable to hold a fruit component back from a lunch meal and then use it as a dessert? Like maybe as a way to entice, a kiddo to eat Brussels sprouts or broccoli. Can you say, I know you really like that applesauce cup. If you eat those Brussels sprouts, I'll give you the applesauce cup as dessert. Yeah, about 2/3 of you answered. That's pretty good, and you're correct. It's a no, right? You've got to serve all those menu items, meal component items together as a meal. You can't hold back something a kiddo likes and try to use it to like leverage. Yeah, and a site's approved meal service time is 11:30 until 12:15. So we haven't covered a question like this. I guess I'm trying to trick you. We've got 3 participants waiting in line at 12:15. right? Should you serve those participants a meal? Can you? Maybe is a better way to phrase that question. Yeah, you're exactly right. Lots of you got that one right. That is correct. You should serve those participants a meal. So think about being an open site. And this doesn't apply so much to those of you that operate closed enrolled. You're not anticipating, walk-ins coming in. You're not even planning or preparing for that. But an open site is a little bit more difficult to plan for. And you've advertised your meal service time is 11:30 to 12:15. And naturally, someone thinks if I get in line and get there at 12:15, I'll get a meal. And that is true. You want to do that. One of the things you could consider communicating with signage is that, meal service stops at 12:15, got to be done eating by 12:30. And if you're like a stationary site at a regular location, that's probably not difficult to accommodate or sort of plan around. But if you operate like a mobile meals sort of unit where you travel to various sites around a community, that's the time I think when this consideration sort of becomes more of a thing for you, because you have a route you need to run, a schedule you need to keep. So communicating that sort of thing up front from day one, and then making sure that information is visible every single day that you operate meals is going to help people understand what to anticipate when it comes to being able to get a meal and when I need to be done eating. Especially important with a mobile meals unit, you're leaving. You don't have staff that are staying maybe at the library or at the park to ensure people aren't walking off with a meal. So when you're packing up your truck and you're ready to get out of there to go to the next place, no one can be left with a meal, right? They have to be finished eating. It has to be discarded if they're not going to be able to consume it on site. You don't want people leaving with a perishable item they save for hours, save unsafely, of course. I mean, that happens, and then they get sick from it. So just a couple, kind of odd things that you probably wouldn't think about in many cases to consider when it comes to different types of meal service models and meal times and timing all that the way you need to. Okay, let's see. Oh, I didn't click through these because I wasn't thinking very well. And we want to take just a minute to look at questions, Jessica.
Yes, sure. Let's see. One of the questions actually was, if children are online when the service time ends, we can continue to serve them. So that was a good one that we covered there. Beth, were there any others that you saw? Let's see.
There's one on, does a delivery ticket include needing temperatures from the central kitchen to a different site? Who is going to cook and serve it? And yes, anytime you deliver food to another site that is going to be cooked, then you need to take that temperature. Like if you're sending a case of peaches, canned peaches, no, you don't have to take that temperature. But if it is in pans ready for them to stick in the oven, yes, it has to be time and temperature controlled. So you have to have that temperature on there.
And then there was one more question. Is there an amount of time required between breakfast and lunch? And Katie, I shared the same guidance that you had shared at the last training. The 3 hours must elapse between the beginning of one meal service. Is that right? Okay. Including snacks in the beginning of another. No, that's okay. I can read it.
I see Tammy's question. I hope I didn't confuse you or anyone else, Tammy, when I was talking about that last poll question. Or maybe you asked that before we even got to the question. Yeah, she did. Okay. Great. Thank you, Jessica. And Beth, I appreciate you manning the chat and answering questions. I wanted to spend a little time just introducing to those of you who might be unfamiliar with it, the food buying guide, which is a really wonderful tool. I know you cannot click on the link when I'm presenting slides, but I just wanted to make sure the hyperlink is in the slides because of course we'll post these along with the recording of today's training early next week. So you could navigate to the slide to find the link. The other obvious and easy thing to do is to just Google food buying guide and you'll easily, I think the first search result will obviously be the guide, but this allows you to search by keyword, by meal component, and even by category to really help narrow the search, make it less time consuming to find what you're looking for. And you've heard me talk about the bottom line being so important. It's that financial piece of the program you need to have tight control over, probably even more so now than in the past, just because food costs have been rising. And of course, the meal reimbursement is intended to cover almost all of your food and labor costs, but because costs have been rising, you know, having tighter control over that is a necessary thing to do. So I wanted to take a look at a couple of menu items just to and utilize the food buying guide to do a little work to make sure you feel comfortable with understanding how to use it. And I know you can't walk away from today feeling like you're a master of it, but if you give it a little bit of your time and just do a few, I guess, a week's worth of menu items, you'd probably feel very comfortable with understanding how to utilize it to make sure you've got good cost control. Primarily, it helps you understand how much you need to prepare, and that helps you know how much to purchase. So you're not way over purchasing and spending money that you just don't have an excess of, obviously. So you got your menu items: hamburger on a bun with carrot sticks, a small apple, and then your 1% plain milk. And of course, you need to refer to your Bible for the summer, which is the Summer Food Service Program meal pattern. Until you have it memorized, always have it handy because it helps you know exactly what those minimum portions are. I want to take a moment to mention that we understand a 16-year-old kid is probably going to eat a little bit more than a 3-year-old. And if you're a school continuing to follow the breakfast and lunch meal patterns, you know there are different age and grade groups represented there. They have different minimum serving sizes that sort of reflect the needs that change as kiddos get older. Summer program meal pattern does not have that built in. If you follow this meal pattern, you still have to provide those minimums regardless of if it's a 3-year-old who you think might not eat all of that. Remember, you're reimbursed to provide not only the components, but also the components in the minimum serving sizes. Of course, you can serve slightly larger portions if you have the, fiscal means to do that, but you cannot go overboard. Every penny you spend obviously has to have a defensible and reasonable application or, purpose. So just keep that in mind when it comes to, planning your preparation amounts. And of course, again, we recognize there's a difference between a 3-year-old and a 16-year-old. They're going to eat different amounts. But just make sure you can defensively explain to us why you might have served a slightly larger portion to a teenage kid. Okay, so let's zoom in a little bit to look at that hamburger, the ground beef we need. We know that for lunch meal, we have to provide a serving size of 2 ounces of ground beef. So I'm going to go back to my food buying guide where obviously I can search for that item in the search bar here. And what the website gives to me is this very important information, and I've highlighted in yellow some of those important details. So you have to pay attention to make sure you've selected exactly what you need to get the correct information. We plan to serve 75 lunches. I know that each of my hamburger patties has to weigh 2 ounces after it's been cooked. So in all, I need 150 ounces of edible portion. Well, I think the easiest way to do this is to determine what the yield is on the ground beef type I purchase, and I purchased 8515. So highlighted in yellow in the second column is the no more than 15% fat. That's the 8515 beef I purchased. There's 90-10, there's 80-20, there might be others, but I want to make sure that I've chosen the correct row that represents what I actually purchased. So per pound, in a pound, there are 16 ounces. So per pound, I get 12 ounces of edible ground beef after it's been cooked, right? So my yield there is 16 ounces in a pound divided by 12 ounces of edible portion for a yield of 0.75. So then I turn this into a sentence in my head, and others obviously think of it differently. But I say to myself, I need 150 ounces. What do I need? You know, divide it by the yield. And that tells me what I need to prepare. So I know what I need, how much I need to purchase. So it's what I need divided by what I get, the yield, to tell me how much I need to have available to meet the requirement to serve 2 ounces of cooked ground beef to 75 kids who are going to eat lunch. Okay, we'll do one more example. It really surrounds the grains group because I want to bring to your attention that there is a grains chart you need to utilize when it comes to serving grain items. Again, you're going to use the meal pattern chart to determine what the minimum serving size is. An ounce equivalents for grains. Grains chart group B has hamburger buns. And if I look at the ounce equivalents for grains in group B, it tells me that 1 ounce equivalent or 1 serving of grain literally equals 1 ounce by weight. Now, there are other kinds of grain products where you have to have a serving size greater than 1 ounce by weight or more than 28 grams, which is the weight of an ounce, or a different way to say an ounce by weight. That would be a grain item where you have other non-grain components in the product. An example might be croissants. You know, there's lots of butter in a croissant. I don't think that's in this list here. I can't see it because my Zoom stuff is in the way, of course. Yeah, so you have to get the equivalent amount of grain to prepare a croissant, you know, you'd have to have a croissant that actually weighs more than 28 grams or 1 ounce. So that's an example to help sort of illustrate that you really need to look at this chart. It's going to give you the most helpful information to make sure you understand how much that bun, that croissant, maybe that cookie has to weigh to provide a 1 ounce equivalent of the grain. In a cookie, for example, we're only crediting the grain portion towards meeting the minimum required quantity. We can't credit the chocolate chips that are also in the cookie batter to meet the grain requirement. So that's why you need to utilize this grains chart. I know I need 75 hamburgers. At a minimum, I need an ounce equivalent per burger, right? So of course I need at least 75 ounces of grain altogether. So if I got all my bags of buns together, I would have to do a little math to make sure they provided 75 ounces of grain. That's one way you could do it. But I think an easier way is to check out the nutrition facts label on the buns or rolls you've chosen to use as buns for your burgers. We can see here that each roll weighs 63 grams. I did a little math that I did not write down here. We know that an ounce equivalent, again, back from this one, a 1 ounce equivalent equals 28 grams. I'm going to use that information here, right? 63 divided by 28. My bun weighs 63 grams. I know an ounce equivalent weighs 28 grams. Each of my buns is equivalent to 2 1/4 ounces of grain. That exceeds the 1 ounce minimum. I know I've got enough here. I know that each package gives me 12 rolls that I can turn into my hamburger buns. And then I do a little math. I need 75. I get 12 in each package. I need 6 1/4 packages. Well, I can't buy 6 1/4, but I can buy 7. So that's what you would plan to buy. And that's how you can utilize the food buying guide to help you make those determinations. Thanks for hanging in there. We're getting closer to being done, believe it or not. Yeah, you're doing a great job. Obviously, we had carrot sticks, and we'll post these slides with the recorded training, so you could utilize this as a training tool if you need to, or just an opportunity to review what you believe you may have learned from our short training on the food buying guide. But again, encourage you to utilize it, familiarize yourself with it. It's a great tool to help maintain that fiscal sort of control over your program. You need to mention that child nutrition label. If you're a school person, you're very familiar with this. It's also called the CN label, and it has to be on any like commercially processed or combination food or menu items that you serve. This label states the amount of creditable component in 1 serving of that food. So if you purchase a Tombstone pizza from Hy-Vee or Baker's or Walmart, you probably actually should not be doing that, right? It does not have a child nutrition label that tells you and tells me, and Jessica, and Beth exactly how much grain from the crust and how much meat alternate and meats from the cheese and other toppings a slice of that pizza provides. So go back to the orange meal pattern chart, that thing I call the Bible, right? So much of what you do in compliance goes back to meeting those requirements. You've got to demonstrate always how every penny of your program was used to meet those requirements. You can't do that if you don't know how much meat and grain was in your pizza. So you either have to make a homemade pizza, which you could obviously do, or you've got to find a pizza that has the accompanying documentation you need to be able to demonstrate that every penny you spent on the pizza really did help you achieve the goal of meeting the meal pattern requirements. This is what that CN label looks like, and it tells you really important information. In the example you see here, we see that 3 chicken patty fritters provides 2 ounces of meat and 1 ounce of grain. Now, for those of you who don't quite have the meal pattern chart memorized, at lunch, we know the minimum required portion of meat alternate is 2 ounces. The minimum requirement for grain is 1 ounce. This tells me if I serve to every kiddo 3 of those chicken patty fritters, I've checked off meeting both the meat alternate requirement and the grain requirement. Okay. I know I need to serve 3 of these for each person that receives a meal. This helps me understand how much to prepare, then I know how much to purchase. So it's really valuable information you wouldn't want to try to live without. I want you to keep in mind a few things, though, that CN labels don't indicate that a product is healthy. We would not expect to see a CN label on like a can of green beans or peaches. It's only for combination foods where you have more than one component group represented in the food. I used pizza as an example before. Chicken nuggets or any kind of breaded chicken like we saw in the actual label example on the previous slide would be good. Probably very commonly seen items that have a CN label. So like it says here, typically those are found on the processed items. Sometimes those tend to have higher sodium and total and saturated fat content. Just want to draw your attention to the value that comes with comparing nutrition facts labels, right? Trying to opt for or choose the options that are a little bit healthier. And I went forward too soon. I didn't mention here in the slide, but some of you are probably familiar with, if you can't find a food with a CN label, you may be able to reach out to the manufacturer of the item and they could provide you a signed product formulation statement. So manufacturers pay the USDA to have the CN label placed on the product. Some don't want to pay for that, but they can still do an analysis to determine how much a serving provides in terms of meeting the component group requirements. So anyway, a product formulation statement is another way to get the same information. So now you've prepared your meals. You know that they meet the minimum required serving sizes. You've done a great job of documenting all those necessary details on a production record. And again, I want to reiterate how important the details are there. It should be a record that anyone in your team could recreate the exact same meal the exact same way. Okay, that's the level of detail we need to see on those records. The other record that's of utmost importance is your daily meal count form. Some of you might have slightly different versions of your own of this. If you want to utilize that and have any questions about making sure it contains all the necessary info, like I said, about production records, I say the same thing here. Give it to one of our team members. We can kind of vet it for you and make sure it's got all those most important pieces of info. Every detail you see on this record is something we would expect to be completed when we review these. And we do review these records. We don't tell you that we're coming in advance. We would expect to see all of your meal count records for the whole summer, or at least the week we're visiting, at your site, available and ready for us to look at. Your records, according to regulations, have to be readily available to us anytime we ask. You can't say they're locked in the trunk of the car and my son has the car and he's like in South Dakota or something. That wouldn't work, right? That would not be okay. That to us means they don't exist, right? And what happens when something doesn't exist? You can't keep the money. So keep that in mind. So you've got to have a daily meal count form for every day that you serve meals. It's so important to document, document, document. You never want to lose one of these. You want to keep them under lock and key. They're just so important. So you've got all the details across the top that you need to make sure you fill out. I want you to train your site supervisors and your other staff to understand that this has to be completed at the end of the meal service line when that person can verify when each kiddo received the meal, right, with all the required components. And that person also needs to be trained to understand that you're marking each number off as you see a child receive a reimbursable meal. If a child accidentally drops their tray on the floor before they get seated and can eat it, they're going to get back in line, of course, to get a meal they can eat, but those meals, can't both be counted. You know, it's one meal per child. So have that person understand how important it is to pay attention. You don't want to give that person too many different tasks at mealtime because it's going to distract them from getting an accurate meal count on this form. You want to keep that in mind when you're kind of assigning tasks and stuff. And obviously getting the right person with the right skill set to do this is important. So someone very detail-oriented who can focus is a great option for someone to complete this form. So which meals are entered into the claim for reimbursement, right? You've got a whole slew of these forms, probably about 20 of them in any given summer month, right? Which of these numbers am I totaling to put into my claim for reimbursement at the end of the month? Well, the answer here is total first meals, which on the form, you get a blank form from us you can use as a master copy, right? That would be number 2, where you see in red the number 19, as well as total second meals, which is like sort of section number 3, where we see there are 2 of those marked. You also have below that sections for program adults and non-program adults. You definitely need to record how many of those you serve, but those numbers are never, ever, ever included in a claim for reimbursement. You get reimbursed only for meals you serve to kids age 1 to 18. Program adults are the ones who work in the meal service, preparing and serving the lunch or breakfast. They can receive a meal at no charge. You need to mark it on this form because we're comparing this form. You said I served 28 meals. Does my production record document that I prepared enough to serve 28? Is one of the ways we use that information. Below at program adults, you see non-program adults. We would expect to see, and you would too, for the purposes of documenting income to your program, if non-program adults receive a meal. So this is an adult who accompanies a kiddo to the meal service site. Could be a mom, dad, an adult babysitter, grandparent, aunt, uncle, anything like that. They can receive a meal, they have to pay for it, or there has to be outside funding. So you saw, if you remember back early in the training, Jessica shared the site rule sheet where on there in the sample we gave, it identifies what the meal prices are. So it's not a shock to adults who visit your site. They should anticipate, understand that they need to pay for a meal. There are some cases in Nebraska where sponsors secure grant funds to help pay for that. The adult meals they serve to non-program adults. But the point being, you got to record it here so we can see that the amount of money necessary to cover those adult meals came into or was like identified as revenue to your program. Okay, so make sure, again, you've got a site supervisor trained who understands the importance of this record, right? You put the right person in the position to record these meals like they're supposed to be recorded, and you include only numbers from section 2 and section 3 in your claim for reimbursement each month. You're never including adults in a claim for reimbursement. Things you cannot do on this form include what I put inside the red box. Do not cross out a bunch of numbers at once. To me, that says you may have used tray count to count meals, and that wouldn't work, right? Got to have those eyes on the kiddos as they go through the line, marking off each number one by one. Tray count wouldn't work. We don't know if the tray was served to a kiddo or an adult. We don't know if one kid or two kids dropped their tray because they bumped into each other. Remember, you can't claim meals that didn't go into a kid's mouth, right? And dropped trays are examples of that. They weren't consumed by a kiddo, but you don't know that by tray count. You've got to have someone really in tune, detail-oriented and focused on this task during mealtime, and they need to mark those numbers one by one. And remember, meals can't be claimed if the meal count form is in any way incomplete, if it's missing date, meal type, any of that information, right? Or if it's got that line drawn through a bunch of numbers, we wouldn't allow you to claim meals that were not documented properly. Oops, my apologies. So a couple other things I want to make note of about counting meals. Train your site supervisor to know this stuff. Obviously, I talked about not using tray count. Don't use a clicker to count meals. Use a point of service meal counting method. If you're a school, you know this well, you know how to do that. If you're not a school, you don't do this year round. That point of service person, a physical person at the end of the line, make sure that you've got a meal that meets the meal pattern requirements. It includes all the components. So that person also probably needs to have some working knowledge of what that meal pattern chart says, okay? Got to count them as they're recorded, as they're served to each participant. You can't do a meal count sheet beforehand. You can't do it the next day or the evening after the lunch service. And if you provide more meals than one of our meal count forms accommodates, add additional pages. Write the date and the meal type on all the pages, staple them together in the corner and keep them together with your other records. Right? We don't want to be confused by what we find when we come to a site. Make it foolproof for someone like me, right? No questions means you've done a great job with your records. So that's your goal. Katie, Jessica, Beth would have no questions. I keep excellent records, right? I want to bring to light field trips, and that's highlighted in the right-hand corner of this form in yellow with red letters. Lots of you probably have kids go on field trips to do fun things occasionally during the summertime. You might send a meal with them, right? They leave mid-morning and don't get back until the afternoon. You're going to send lunch with them, of course. You've got to have a production record to support the lunch meal that was sent. So we've kind of been over that. You also need to send a meal count form with them. You cannot count their meals because you put them on the bus or the van, right? You didn't see those meals reach a kiddo. So that's when it has to be counted, when it's handed to them. You got to make sure one of the accompanying adults on the field trip understands when to do this form and how to do it, okay? That's also important. So lots of people need to have at least some working knowledge of the program, obviously to serve as backups, but for those times when you can't send someone who normally takes care of a task, like on a field trip, for example, make sure whoever's there understands the importance of the documentation, okay? If you operate an open site, but a subset or small group of your usual participants at that site go on a field trip, I want to make sure to remind you all that your open site still has to be open to take like walk-ins and be able to provide them meals. Again, you're advertising that your site is open to serve lunch from 11:15 until 12:30 Monday through Friday, starting June 1st through July 31st. Parents might remember that, kids might, right? They might come to your site to expect to receive a meal that's identified in your operation days. So you have to be open and able to do that for them. Food safety, of course, is a super important consideration during the summertime, especially if you serve meals at a non-traditional location where you don't have facilities or equipment for time temperature control. You got to make sure all those sites have thermometers and temp logs. Got to have somebody trained to know when to take those temps and how to record them. Lots of sites need access to proper hand washing facilities. Make sure you keep that in mind. Ensure obviously your regular, HACCP sort of practices, adjust those as needed depending on the kind of meal service model you're using and the location that you're at. Do your sanitization of services and equipment as needed. And just keep in mind that health department inspection is a regular thing that happens in the summer. I don't want you to get written up for poor food safety practices. If you have any questions about utilizing an alternate site, for example, making sure that you are adhering to food safety practices that would be expected in that kind of situation, don't hesitate to reach out to your local health department just to make sure you've got the most accurate information about what they'll be looking to see when they visit your site to ensure you're adhering to food safety practices and regulations. When it comes to leftover meals, I think first and foremost, we want to reduce the likelihood that you have an abundance of those. You can keep them and serve those food items the next day. Of course, that requires having proper holding equipment and monitoring temperatures and knowing when and if you need to throw a food away because it was in the temperature danger zone for too long. So keep that in mind, right? If you don't have the staffing capacity to sort of monitor that, just do a little extra due diligence to minimize leftover items, either ordered from a vendor, a central kitchen, or prepared on site. So keep tight control over that. If you've got capacity to keep those leftovers, you want to use them first the next day. Adjust ordering if ordering is part of your, from a vendor or central kitchen. So lots of good communication throughout the summer is really important. It's going to help reduce leftovers or waste associated with over ordering meals. And remember, store your cold foods overnight if you can. Make sure it's 41 degrees or lower. If you can't maintain that cold holding temperature, those foods do have to be discarded. And that's certainly something a health inspection or site visit is going to look at, right? So you want to make sure you've got that under tight control too. Let's take a quick look at some program flexibilities, and then we'll take a short break just to check the chat and see what kinds of questions we've had there. We'll kind of tie a bow around all of this with a short discussion about program costs and procurement. The two things I'm sure you are most interested in hearing about today is what we'll end the day with. So do those flexibilities right quick first. If you've operated summer before, you are probably familiar with using the share table. You don't have to use it, but you can use it, right? This would be utilized for unopened, unused whole food items that a child doesn't want from a meal they receive. Example would be like, a fruit with a thick peel, a banana or an orange, or any kind of commercially packaged ready-to-eat item. Milk could be placed on a share table as long as you have a way to hold it at temp. So a tray with like ice, has to, or put it back maybe in a cooler of some type. That's okay to do. A child can do that. Some kids don't like milk, or they have an aversion to bananas for a texture reason, whatever. They can put that on the share table. From the share table, another participant at your site can come get a second banana or a second carton of milk if they want it. So it's one way to help maybe address waste. It might be a way to give a slightly, a second helping to one of your older kiddos who has a larger appetite. You're never marking on a meal count sheet if a participant takes a second milk or a banana, right? That's not a full meal. You've already claimed like that component of a meal by marking it on the sheet when the original kid who got the banana went through the line. So you've received the money for it, or you will receive because you marked it on your sheet, right? You're not marking on a meal count sheet anything other than a full meal the first time it was given to a kid, right? Any component comes out of it, goes to the share table, someone else comes and gets it. That's fine. You're not marking that anywhere though. That's not something you claim. When you've got equipment available, any complete meal you have left over, non-perishable components or even perishable ones can be stored and used the next day. Of course, if they're not taken by a kiddo as like a second helping of something, that's fine. Again, make sure you're following your state and local health and safety codes when it comes to maintaining proper temperatures for perishable foods. And of course, utilize the bottom half of that production record we spent a lot of time talking about to record leftovers, okay? I prepared 100 and I had 10 milks left over, right? That's the kind of details we want. And, additional details to sort of share what was taken or put on the share table and that sort of thing is fine. And if you utilize share table, we would expect to see maybe varying numbers or amounts of leftover items depending on the menu item. We also allow sites to let participants take one like fruit or grain item off site to eat later. This, if it's a fruit item, it obviously has to be in its whole form. You couldn't have done any peeling, slicing, chopping, dicing to it, right? It can be from their own meal. Like I got a sack lunch with an apple or a tray lunch and a whole banana was on it. I can take my banana home with me and eat it later if I want to. I could take a banana off the share table too. So if a student or a kiddo takes a share table item, they don't have to eat it on site if it's not perishable. If it's a milk carton, of course, they do need to consume that one on site. So like I said, any kind of individual, safe, non-perishable item can go home with the kiddo if they want to. Okay, obviously nothing that someone else could have maybe compromised in some way with germs of their own. Those are not the kinds of things that would go on a shared table, especially not for taking home later, right? Or to eat later. So a few examples here: individually packaged crackers, fruits, things like that are okay for shared table. Obviously also for walking grain, apple, that sort of thing. So quick break for the chat. Jessica or Beth answered some questions, I'm sure, have not been keeping track of that.
Yes. So there was a question. Do we charge adult prices if a child takes a second meal?
Say that again.
Do we charge adult price if a child takes a second meal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't spend enough time or any time talking about that when we talked about the meal counts. I don't know if I've got very good slide on it. Even in this part here, where we talked about which numbers from a meal count sheet you include in your monthly claim for reimbursement. Obviously mentioned section number 2, where the red number 19 is, that's first meals. And then section number 3 with the red number 2, I serve 2 second meals. So if you collect money for second meals, you would never include them in your claim. And a claim has, you know, a few different boxes: number of meal service days, total number of lunches and breakfast, first lunches and first breakfast. There are additional boxes where you report the number of second meals you served. And the reason we ask you to report that there is because the system does this calculation that helps us obviously follow regulations that says a sponsor can claim up to 2% of its first meals as second meals. This is a little bit confusing. I know it's kind of difficult when you're not actually doing it and entering a claim. It's kind of hard to conceptualize. But if I served 100 first meals on Monday and lunches, and I served 5 second lunches, I only get to receive reimbursement for 2 of those 5. So lots of folks choose to not mess with that because they don't want there to be excessive consumption of second meals, because you don't get reimbursed for any value above 2% of your first meals. With that in mind, you could choose to, if you claim second meals, obviously you can't collect money for them from a kid. You just sort of have to figure out a different way to fund any second meals that you serve that are above that 2% threshold. I guess another option would be to never claim a second meal, advertise that you do charge for seconds, right? So there's like a variety, I think, of ways to sort of deal with it. Obviously depends on if you have outside funding to cover the cost of excessive in quotes is the way regulations would say it, second meals. It's kind of a hard question for me to answer, obviously, on the spot. It depends. And like I said, lots of people don't do it because they don't want to risk having to find money from some other place to cover having served a lot of seconds that they're never going to be able to get reimbursement for. Who asked that one? I feel like I need to send a follow-up email. Make sure.
That was Carol.
Oh, Faller. Yeah.
Yep, Carol.
Carol and I are great friends by email. If you need to chat that one out, Carol, we certainly can. And can you offer an extra entree for a fee? Yeah, I mean, you could charge an a la carte price for something extra. Like if a kiddo wants an additional breaded chicken sandwich, for example. Yep. Because that's not something you'd put on the share table. That's not individually packaged or, yeah, has the kind of protection of packaging around it. So yes.
Katie, there's a food safety question that David asked, and I was put it in the chat, but I just wanted to verify with everybody. The concern about the share table or the fresh fruit and vegetable bars, check with your local health department. Most of the state is using the share tables and fresh fruit and veggie bars. But David, you're in Omaha, so you need to check with Douglas County. I'm guessing they're going to they might be more lenient now, but they were telling them no earlier. In March, they were still telling them no. And then also Lancaster County is still pretty strict on what they're doing in Hall County, but everyone else, it seems like they're allowing it.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for the answer. Helpful info, Beth. All righty. Anything else I didn't see in the chat, Jessica?
No, I think that was it. I'll look through again, then we can address at the end if there's anything that comes up.
Yeah, I'll keep everyone's favorite topic, money, program cost, procurement, right? This won't take us too long, but of course, think of your questions while we're navigating this. I would imagine that if you have a question or need some clarification, there is definitely someone else in the room who's got a same or similar question to you. So love to use this opportunity to get those things answered. Obviously, Jessica mentioned up front that any federally funded program requires that we document exactly how every penny of the money was used. And obviously, it seems, pretty clear that your operating costs are the main focus of using the funds. So that includes the cost of the foods you use to provide meals. You'll probably need to purchase some non-food supplies that are going to be necessary for your food service. So if that's the case, you can use your reimbursement for those purposes. Some of you might have to pay a rental fee for space to hold a meal site. Often, I think that's probably not a huge concern, but if it's something you need, you can use reimbursement to cover that cost. And you can also use money you get from your federal reimbursement to cover the cost of meals that are provided to adults who either volunteer with meal preparation or service, or even paid staff, your paid food service staff, right? They can get a meal at no charge through the SFSP. The one thing I need to remind you of is they can't be included in your monthly claim for reimbursement. When you total your claim at the end of the month and report it in our online system, you're including only meals that were served to kids. And if you remember back to that point of service meal count sheet, we try to do a good job of differentiating the meal type, whether it's child at the top or an adult at the bottom, to help you keep those numbers separate. You're never including any adult meal in your monthly claim for reimbursement, okay? But if an adult is involved in meal service, meal preparation, they can get a meal and not have to pay for it. That's like an allowable cost to your program. So a couple of quick questions that I think are going to be pretty easy for you to answer, but are also going to help us illustrate a couple of important points about allowable costs. This one seems obvious, of course, but are those foods that are purchased to prepare meals for kids allowable? Like, is that an allowable cost to the program, or maybe not? Yeah, you're great at answering. This is, yes, that's allowable, definitely. That's how you want to use your money. I can't think of an example of a food item that's included in a meal or a set of meals that get served to kids that wouldn't work. Of course, you want to focus on those items that are required in the meal pattern chart. You don't want to serve extra stuff because it's like an extra above the basics, above what's necessary sort of thing. You definitely want to stick to what that meal pattern chart requires as a cost management measure. Yeah, you all did a great job there. Oops. I'm not smart enough to operate this. There you go. Yeah, you can see the answer there. Okay, let's do one more. What about the coffee that you purchased for food service staff to have like as a drink during their breaks? So you've got your food service staff. They're there for preparation service of breakfast and lunch, and like mid-morning, they take a break. They like to drink coffee. Can you use your reimbursement money to purchase that coffee? Yeah, 2/3 of you have answered. Good, and most of you have gotten this one correct. Yeah, definitely not an allowable cost to the program. You won't see coffee on a meal pattern chart, right? And also this coffee is not being consumed by the kids who visit the summer food service program. So it's not an allowable cost. You got to have a different funding source to pay for or to purchase the coffee that those food service folks drink. It's fine if they take a break and drink it. You just can't use your food service account funds to pay for it. And then what about transportation costs related to delivering meals to your meal service sites? You know, can you use your reimbursement money to pay for like the mileage associated with like your route for delivery or anything like that? It's kind of a tricky one, I know. Yeah, but if you've got a vehicle, a van, a bus, something like that, yes, that you use to transport foods for the express purpose of meal service, summer food service program, you can use your reimbursement money to cover the cost of the mileage on that vehicle. You would obviously use the federal, oops, sorry, stop sharing, my bad, the federal mileage rate, and you would have a daily log on which you record how many miles and where that van or delivery vehicle went. So again, that's all part of the details necessary to demonstrate how every penny of your reimbursement was spent, ensuring that it was spent on the intended purpose of the program. So it's a little bit of extra documentation, but if it means you get to use funds that are going to help you reach more kids by doing like a mobile meals route or transporting meals to a few different community locations, then it might be money well spent in the end. And honestly, the more children you get to participate in your meal service, the more financially viable your program likely is. So it might be something to consider, and it is an allowable use of the money of the funds. Good job on those questions. Thanks for engaging in those. Oops, I apologize. So just a couple of reminders about how you use that money, right? You have to use your funds, obviously, to pay for meals or the food used to prepare them, to pay for your staff, unless you have a nice set of volunteers. And we've got good examples in Nebraska of how volunteer power has been leveraged to make successful meal programs, and that's fine too. Obviously, you can use the funds to improve your operation. And I think one of the most common options of improvement is increasing food quality. So food insecurity isn't just an empty stomach, but it's a stomach that doesn't, or a body that doesn't get high nutritional value in the foods that it consumes. So that's one of the purposes of the summer meals program. We know high nutrition quality is an emphasis of the school meals program. This is intended to provide what a school meals program would in the school year, which we know is not in session in the summer. So that's one of the intended purposes of this program. So if you've got a little bit of extra money at the end of the summer and you plan to operate the program again the next summer, you've got to keep that money right where it is. If you're ceasing operation, we always want you to reach out to a member of our team so we know what we need to do with any remaining funds. But if you operate the school meals program or the CACFP at-risk after-school snack or supper program during the academic year, if you've got extra SFSP money at the end of the summer, you can use that money in either school meals or CACFP, okay? They're all child nutrition programs. The money just needs to stay in that food service account. It can't come out. That's especially important for folks who like take a pause. You know, you end your summer, you don't do any meals program until the next summer. Whatever money's in that account has to stay there unless it's used to pay a bill related to your summer meals program. Okay, got to leave that money alone. Oops. Some unallowable costs would be those associated with any excess meals you order from your vendor or any excess foods you don't end up using in a child nutrition program. Okay, so that's where that tight control over what you're purchasing really matters. We never want to question where money that you spent went. We don't want to think that you have a really good friend in the food vendor business who prepared you 100 extra meals every day for the summer and got a whole bunch of money from you for meals that never actually reached a kid's mouth or body. So you got to keep tight control over that. We're going to ask lots of questions if we think something like that's going on. Obviously, you know, you got to meet the meal pattern requirements. Don't give partial reimbursement for meals that partially met the requirements. So you got to make sure all those meals you serve to kids provide all the required components in the minimum serving sizes. We can't let you claim meals that are served at an unapproved site or off-site or outside of the approved meal service time, according to what you've put in your online application. And then obviously foods that are not used in food service, like the coffee example we went through before. Those are examples of things you can't use reimbursement to cover. If we discovered that that happened, we would make your organization pay back the food service account. Okay, so really great control, accounting kind of controls, internal controls are things you need to have really, really good control over, just to help, you know, make the review process for when we come to visit you and ask for these records a lot smoother and a lot easier on you. Yeah, make sure you've got really good accounting and cost control procedures in place. Any meals you serve to an adult who isn't involved in meal service or preparation obviously needs to pay for the meal, or you need to have some other kind of outside funding available to pay for that. Grant funds is something I mentioned earlier, so we see that sometimes in Nebraska. For those of you who have vendors, if you receive spoiled or damaged meals, or the meals that you could never serve to a kiddo, those are ones you should not pay your vendor for. Again, kind of underscoring how important it is for that site supervisor to check deliveries when they come in. So they need to make sure that what they're getting is stuff they can give to kids, because that's the only way you can claim it and get reimbursement for it. So they shouldn't be charging you for when those sorts of things happen. You get a meal you can't serve to a kid because it's incomplete, it's spoiled, or it's damaged in some way. So obviously, reimbursement's based on the number of meals you serve. So I'm not going to get into this a whole lot, but when you're on the web page checking out the reimbursement, if you make your own meals, you know, you get a slightly higher rate compared to a sponsor that exists in an urban area and has a contract with a vendor. And they don't make their own meals, they get them from a company. That rate of reimbursement is just a little bit less. And that's what you see in the table at the bottom of this slide. And this is, of course, available on our website too. So last topic, you've done a great job of hanging in there. I know there's a couple questions or maybe answers in the chat, and we'll get to those as soon as I finish. I obviously put the wrong slide there. This little section on procurement, right? Jessica mentioned to you the kind of two sets of regulations that really govern what you're doing. Obviously, you've got the super circular 2 CFR Part 200. That applies to all federal programs. 7 CFR Part 225 applies specifically to summer. So you'll see some very similar and overlapping regulations in both of those sections. But I wanted to bring to your attention the three main types of purchases or procurement, or ways you purchase food. You've got micro purchases, informal, and formal. So most people in this room probably utilize a micro purchasing method, which can be done for, you know, all purchases $10,000 or less. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I wanted to first bring to your attention that you need to kind of identify a purchasing plan, or you know, outline some details about how you're going to purchase food, how much you know that you're going to need, all that sort of thing, where you know your cycle menu, you know what you need to purchase. You've done a little bit of work with a food buying guide to help you determine approximately how much you're going to need to get. I know some of these things are difficult to plan for, especially if you operate an open site and your open site is in a new location that's maybe never been operated before. Takes some tweaking to get a purchasing plan in place, of course. But you're going to obviously base your orders on your menu items. the number of meals you plan to serve, what your ordering and delivery frequency is. So just wanted to bring to your attention some of the details you need to spend a little bit of time thinking about if you haven't done that yet. And then you're going to obviously select products that meet your site's needs. Try to choose the things you know kids like, but that are also nutritious. We encourage you to purchase or procure locally when you can. And with supply chain issues kind of being challenging, obviously this year, we want to let you know that you obviously have the full, option to purchase from alternative sources when it's needed. Those prices obviously still need to be reasonable. So you can't be purchasing exclusively from your cousin who charges twice as much as anyone else for tomatoes or lettuce or taco shells or whatever it is. That price still has to be reasonable. And you can ask vendors like a Cisco or a Cashway if they have access to any locally produced menu items, and you can ask them to include those in the options available to you. You just got to make sure you do that thing at the bottom of this slide where you allow competition for your business to be both fair and open. And if you've got questions about procurement, we're always here to help. I know sometimes you don't think of those questions till you're in the moment having to make these decisions. I did this mistake again, Jessica, shame on me. Stop share, Katie. I have to fix this. I can't believe I did it again. It's at $10,000 is the micro purchase threshold. So if you buy things that cost $10,000 or less, then all you need to make sure you do is distribute that business equitably amongst all qualified suppliers. I think a reasonable example of this is if you do most of your purchasing from a combination of like Walmart, Cisco, Hy-Vee, and Cashway, that's good, right? That's good enough for us. We would look at receipts and invoices, be able to determine that you purchase from whoever has the lowest price most of the time, then that's what a micro purchase is. There's some more formal options, especially if you purchase in much larger quantities and the amount of those purchases is $250,000 or more. That's when we would expect to see some more formal processes in place. But if you do that, you're well versed. Like if you're in this room and you use one of these other more formal methods, you know how to do it well. Those of you who might not be familiar with all those other options probably don't need to be. You just need to show us that you've purchased from a variety of suppliers. If you choose to purchase from only one vendor or supplier, you got to do a cost comparison for us that demonstrates for us why you chose to purchase all of your menu items, for example, from Cisco. Okay, if you've got questions about that as you're navigating procurement, don't hesitate to reach out to a member of our team. We need to tell you also that if you have the opportunity to utilize small minority and women-owned businesses, this is supported in regulation. I know that those smaller producers in Nebraska might not be able to handle the volume that you need to purchase from them, but if it's reasonable and feasible for you to order from a couple of different small producers that can give you what you need, then the regulations allow and even encourage that to happen. So we know that summer meals can be an infusion of business and revenue and income and money to a local economy, especially in Nebraska, where we're so heavily ag-based. We want to make sure you know that we encourage you to use those local producers when it's feasible for you, okay? I think that covers all of the big stuff we meant to talk about today. You want to talk about the attendance record, Jessica, and then we could visit the chat for a moment while people sort of work on completing that and let us know if they've got any technical difficulties accessing that form.
Okay, sure. I'm going to go ahead and paste it in the chat here, and then I'll take over. Let's see. I'll go ahead and take over and share my screen.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. There we go. So you should see on your screen now the attendance record, and I just posted the link in the chat. So if you'll click on there, it's going to ask you to type in your first and last name, It's going to ask for your email and your sponsor name. And then at the very bottom, there's a section for comments. So if you have further questions, or if you need some feedback from us, or if you want to give us feedback, please feel free to fill out anything that you want to in there. And then this way, this will count as your attendance record for the training today. We appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. Katie, I think there are some questions in the chat as well that we can do while everyone's filling that out.
Of course, yeah, great idea.
Okay, let me get back in there.
You want me to do it?
Sure, go ahead,
Okay.
Beth. I'm sorry, I'm getting back in
That's
there.
all right. Jane asked, we received funds from a nonprofit organization for door prizes for our SFSP. Would it be better not to put that money in the lunch fund account?
I agree with that. Yeah, you can keep that separate. I think it's probably easier for you in the end when we ask questions about, an expense from your accounting documents, an expense paid for out of your food service account. If that's not even in there, we wouldn't have to figure out what went in and what came out. That wasn't, an allowable cost. That's a good question.
Yeah. And Jane had another question. Are the paras that help with the summer food service program, are they allowed to be claimed as non-program or as program?
Yeah, like given a meal and not charged for it.
Yes.
This is just such a hot topic in school meals too. I know there's been lots of, and there is, I think, written guidance about this in some instruction from the Food Nutrition Service. If you don't mind, Jane, I'm going to have to table that one. Go find written guidance. I think it's a little bit gray, but we will put that in the follow-up email to this message when we share out the link to the recording, the slides, all that good stuff. We'll find the answer to that one and put it in that message. Yeah, good question.
Okay.
Thanks for asking it. I think it's a popular one to ask. Yeah.
It is. Okay, we have one from Karen, and she wants to know if we will send a list of the local producers. She'd like to know who's in her area, and I'll get with Sarah and see if they have one finalized.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds great. Good question, Karen. I'm glad you asked, because that's a necessary piece of information. If you're going to use a local producer, you need to know who they are and what they can give you. Yeah. We'll put that in the message with all the other goodies we send next week. Thank you.
And then Tammy wants to know if they will receive a copy of the training certificate for their records.
Yes, ma'am. We will use the attendance record that Jessica put in the chat. Yeah, for the contact names and obviously email addresses associated with the folks who are here, and we'll send you a record you can keep with your other summer food stuff for this year.
And in the comments, someone also asked if it would be possible to post a copy of this video. And yes, we will be posting that as soon as we can, along with all of the slides and the handouts. So everything should be on the on our NDE website under the SFSP training section.
Jane, if you're still here from Fairbury, I just wondered if you'd put in the chat, or you can even unmute, what kinds of door prizes you think you are going to have for this year. And I can't recall if you've offered those in the past and what was successful, but just a best practice, I think, that we'd like to share with others in case they're looking for ideas. Yeah.
Well, the Parkview Apartments gave us money to use for Bonham movie theater tickets. And we put stickers on the bottom of their trays so that whoever gets a sticker on the bottom of their tray will get a movie ticket. We have enough of those. We can do one a day. So that's great. The Kiwanis was donating $500, 200 of which they wanted to go for an end of the year prize. We do every day you're there for lunch, you can put your name in. And we draw out at the end of the summer, and I think we're going to buy bicycles. And then the other $300, we buy small prizes so that if it's a different sticker other than the movie theater sticker on the bottom of their tray, they can pull out of the prize box.
I love those ideas. And I mean, you gotta kind of think outside the box sometimes, because as much as you want a healthy meal to be the motivation for kids to come to sites, sometimes it's just not enough, but it sounds like you figured out some things that definitely appeal to them. Yeah.
Kids just want something free. They don't, it really doesn't have to be anything big.
Great ideas. Thanks for unmuting and sharing with us. I was really glad you did that. Thank you.
And I just want to mention again, please fill out the attendance survey, or excuse me, the attendance record. There are about 50 plus people on the call and only about 38 people responded so far. So if you can click on that attendance record, I'll put it in the chat again, just to make sure that everyone gets credit for attending today.
We did have a couple people on their phones that might have had trouble.
Yeah, any other questions? Someone want to unmute to ask their question, or even Jane did a nice job of sharing a best practice. I think, you know, where training is done, you're free to leave, but if there's any idea sharing you'd like to do, we'd be happy to have you unmute and share a kind of a unique plan you're going to implement for this summer. Because I mean, we know the end of the waivers that allowed sponsors to provide meals for more than one day in like a grab and go and take home sort of format is certainly going to have an impact on your participation this summer. So sharing ideas about how you plan to keep kids engaged and coming to the site, I think is going to be needed this year, definitely, because it's just a little bit different now.
One of the things that, this is Brenda from Overton, one of the things that we did, kids love to throw pies in people's faces, whether it's my face or themselves or the kid, somebody else, but we've done pie in the face several times and have it as the big end of the season thing. And it's not too bad to get a Cool Whip in your face.
Is there a way they earn that? You know, if it's an end of summer thing? Bye, Tom. Thank you.
We had it, but the one year we did it as a, we had charts. And every time they eat, they had, you know, they came for a meal. They had to mark, we marked down that they came. And we had different prizes. I tried to get the superintendent to let me put a pie in his face, but he wouldn't do it. But there was different, you know, they had to have so many points for different goals. And a lot of the kids saved their points just to throw the pie in my face. And
they could have like earned prizes along the way for fewer.
Yeah, we had things that we'd gotten from businesses. I make teddy bears. I had a bunch of teddy bears on it. And, you know, it just, you know, and sometimes it was, you know, it was just books. I would go to garage sales and find books and things that were lightly used and put those in there. And it was, but the pie in the face.
You're certainly a good sport to do that, Brenda.
Well, and it was fun. They let me do it to them too. So anyway, that's one thing. It's cheap and it's fun and it keeps them in. That's, I think we'll probably do something like that again this year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds good.
And Brenda posts it on Facebook then,
Sure.
so that everybody can see it, which is really fun.
Yeah,
and
that's,
go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say one of the best things is my Eagle's Nest page that is our kitchen, school kitchen page that's year round. Is we, you know, I post our meals on it. I post what's going on, and it's year round that I, you know, we have stuff up there and it's one of the best things I ever did. It's amazing the number of views that what I post for a town that has 600 and we have like 250 to 300 kids usually in school. To have, you know, 700 views of something is kind of cool.
That is cool. I said Julie put a question in the chat box. I'll answer that in just a minute. But I think those focusing on those fun things that a site offers is especially important now because we want it to be less about the free meal. In some cases or communities that might, drive people away from doing it because it can kind of become stigmatized. And that's not what we want in the summer. We want everyone to feel welcome to come. And it's not just about the food, but it's about the fun and seeing your friends. So leaning heavily into that, I think also might help sort of attenuate or just reduce the reduction we see, that's kind of redundant, in participation by requiring on-site meal service. So just interested in hearing what your successful stories are at the end of the summer, and yeah, getting a chance to sort of return to normal. I know lots of you directors really thrive on seeing the kids in your community visit the site. That like fills your bucket, and I think that's an awesome reason to do the summer meals program.
And I think we will do another Spike event this year, similar to what we did a couple of years ago, because it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. We look forward to seeing pictures and hearing about it. Oh gosh, Julie asked a great question. What are the meal and snack limits? I think you mean like combinations, like what can a kiddo receive each day? So the limits are that a participant can receive a breakfast and a lunch, or a breakfast and a snack, or a lunch and a snack. Those are allowable combinations. The ones that don't work, you cannot do, would be like lunch and supper, or breakfast, lunch and supper. Okay, so I can put the link to the citation for the regulations. Not that you all want to read that, but it's stated quite clearly in the 7 CFR 225, and we'll make sure to include that in the message we send with training from today and resources and stuff too. The other thing you can obviously rest assured in is that the system is not going to let you choose an unallowable meal combination in your site application, but I understand you might want to know that before you get into that, just planning purposes. So in most cases, right, when you serve a breakfast and a lunch, that's fine. Not all cases, that's fine. You cannot do 2 meals and a snack. And then the lunch and supper combination also is not a 2-meal combination that's allowed. Great question, Julie. Thank you. Okay. This is a good question for other food service directors and bookkeepers who are heavily involved in their summer meals preparation and delivery. Chris asks, what kind of hours do you offer your meals? Sort of what's a good time to serve breakfast and lunch perhaps? And do you continue your meal service even after summer school is over? Experts in the room. Or if you're willing to chat with Chris about this sometime, if you put your email address in the chat, she could probably find it or, get it there and send you an email or give you a call. I think that what I understand, I only see Brenda as the only person with her camera on, but from what I understand, you've got to be very intentional about continuing to do things that are going to attract kiddos to come to your summer site after summer school is over. The motivation is just a little bit lower. So doing some of the things that Jane and Brenda both have mentioned might be good ways to keep the participation elevated even after summer school's done. I also want to tell you, you don't have to serve every day of the week. I would probably venture to guess that lots of sites they see lower numbers on Fridays, because if people take time toward the weekend to go do something out of town, there's just other stuff going on, or they don't do summer meals during the week of the county fair, for example. Those are all kinds of things people pick up on and learn along the way, and they adjust their meal service days accordingly. So.
And it's trial and error. We've done breakfast is a little harder to figure out. With the little town, we have more kids that will come in from their doing weights and whatever, the older kids that come in then. And I learned if I do it from 7 to 8, then that's not good, because I don't get the late sleepers or the kids that try to stay in bed until the last minute. So if I changed it to 7:30 to 8:30, so I still get most of my weight kids, and then I get the kids that come in with their hair all tousled, and some of them even have their pajamas on yet, but they get their breakfast. And it's the same thing for lunch. We tried 11 11:30 to 1. That was like, it was dead after 12:30. So we just, you learn what to do. Each community is different.
It is. And Chris, if it helps you feel any better, whatever you kind of start your summertime plan with, if you get into it, like after summer school's over, realize that there just isn't enough participation to keep you going, you can always stop your meal service earlier in the, summer calendar than you maybe planned to. So we can work through that kind of as you get there. And I know I'm not being overly helpful in helping you make a decision, but there's adjustments we can make based on kind of what you're actually experiencing once you get to that point in the summertime. Yeah. Well, it's wonderful having all of you today. Always feel free to reach out to any member of the school or summer meals team with your questions and or concerns or challenges you're facing. And we look forward to a really good summer. We're just grateful that you all have agreed to continue taking on this really important role in your communities. And like I said, I know it's going to be a different summer, but we hope it's successful in its own ways, and just look forward to having a wonderful summer with all of you. So thanks again.